Well, I made the point at the little entry where we were all sitting up here that I was a little worried as to why Colleen chose me to do this one, because I really didn't think I had that many similarities to a harlot. Well, then today, God kind of proved me wrong, because I took the two little grandkids that I was taking care of while their mom was in the labor room, and we went to Macy's and bought some little baby outfits, and then we went to McDonald's. I hadn't been to McDonald's in like 25 years, and the little play area was really nice, and we played in the play area and came home, and then after I got home, I realized my blouse was completely unbuttoned the whole time. So I thought, maybe there are some similarities going on here. You never know. But I love this story so much, and the more I have read it during this season, the more I have fallen in love with it. A little bit of background. The people of Israel have been in Egypt now for about 420 years. In the last 40 years, they've seen 10 plagues, a Red Sea parting, 10 out of 12 spies cower from facing the Canaanites. They've had a 39-year wilderness wandering. They've had a population growth to 3.5 million people. And they've had victory over two very powerful Amorite kings and have been able to take their land east of the Jordan. And now here they are encamped 7 miles from the city of Jericho, the very same place they were encamped 39 years before. Only 2 of those 12 original spies remain, Joshua and Caleb, and they were the 2 that actually gave the good report and said we should go take the promised land. But they didn't, because 10 out of those 12 said, no, we are like grasshoppers in their sight. And here they are facing the very same city of Jericho today. And now Joshua is their leader because Moses has just died. So welcome to a nonfiction thriller of 2 spies, a harlot, and 1 true God. Or as one person put it, 2 nice Jewish boys spend the night in a heathen brothel. You could call it that, but on your handouts, I have given you a scripture page because it's always easier for me when I read along with the scripture if I'm reading the same translation that I'm hearing in my ears. So we are going to actually read this chapter together because it's a thriller and it's fun to read it out loud. So join with me. Joshua chapter 2. Then Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and came into the house of a harlot, whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. Back then, there were inns that doubled as brothels. So you could get 2 for the price of 1, I guess. I don't know, or maybe for a little extra money. But it was very common for travelers to come stay in an inn, and they could choose to partake of the brothel or not. And it was also a very good place to hide yourself because so many travelers would stop by there. And it was probably a good place to get information from people that had information to give about the surrounding territory or whatever was going on there. So most likely Rahab was the inn owner, because it says Rahab's house. She was also the madam of the brothel, and she was also a practicing prostitute. So come follow with me again at verse 2. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. And the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. But the woman who had taken the 2 men and hidden them, and she said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they came from. Obviously lying because she hid them. And it came about, when it was time to shut the gate at dark, that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. So towns back in Canaan in that day were like little mini kingdom states, and they each had their own king, and they were surrounded by a gate, a wall with a gate, and the gate was locked at night, so no one could come in or come out until the next morning when they opened up the gates. This was done for protection. Verse 6, but she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them in the stalks of flax which she had laid in order on the roof. Well, we know it was harvest time because that's when you would cut your stalks of flax and you would let them out to dry, and later you would spin them and you would use them to make linen. So apparently Rahab also had another little business going on where she was making linen, or at least selling the flax. Verse 7, so the men pursued them on the road to the Jordan, to the fjords, which are the places of crossing. And as soon as those who were pursuing them had gone out, they shut the gate. Now before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, now can you just imagine her whispering to them, because we don't want anybody in the inn to hear. I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all of the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. That word melted away means to become demoralized. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore, please swear to me, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So the men said to her, our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours, and it shall come about when the Lord gives us the land, that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. Literally, that's translated, she was living in the wall. It was very common for these city-states back then to have 2 walls about 10 to 15 feet apart, and often within those 2 walls there were boards that were laying either within the wall or on top of the wall, and they were used for the foundation to have houses. So literally, if you had a house on this wall, your back wall would be the outside part of the wall, which was exactly how Rahab's house was. And they were also built, before you started building the wall, they were also built on little retaining walls. Well, not so little, like 20 feet wide, and different heights, either maybe 5, maybe 8 feet tall. And then they started with the wall. And so you can see that she actually lived in the wall, in between the 2 walls. Another thought is that if Jericho was not actually as big as some people thought, what could have been going on here is that they had houses that were built in a circle, and they were all attached, and so all of their back walls actually became the city wall. So you would have windows in the wall. So either way, that's kind of how she could live in the wall. Verse 16, and she said to them, go to the hill country, lest the pursuers happen upon you, and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go on your way. And the men said to her, we shall be free from this oath to you which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window, through which you have let us down. And you gather to yourself into your house your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household. And it shall come about that everyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be free from the oath which you have made us swear. So basically, Rahab has gotten these guys to create a contract with her where each side has something to do. And Rahab has asked for a pledge of their oath. And the pledge, they said, is the scarlet cord that she will hang in the window. It's quite a commitment on Israel's part, on these two spies, to make this commitment that any blood on any of her family's head that have been in the house will be on them. And basically they're saying there's no room for friendly fire going on here once this battle starts. And they're committing to that. Verse 21, and she said, according to your words, so be it. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in her window. And they departed and came to the hill country and remained there for 3 days until the pursuers returned. Now the pursuers had sought them all along the road, but not found them. Just as Rahab described they would do, they took the road to the fjords, the crossing places of the river, and they didn't find anybody. Then the two men returned and came down from the hill country and crossed over and came to Joshua, the son of Nun, and they related to him all that had happened to them. And they said to Joshua, surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and all the inhabitants of the land, moreover, have melted away before us. One of the things I love the most about this story is that you actually see a process of faith happening in this woman. I became a Christian not exactly from the cradle. I was 17, and so as a 17-year-old thinks, I felt I had lived a lot of life at that point. But my process of faith, I could relate so much to Rahab's because I was not raised in a Christian home, and so anything that I knew about God was brand new when I started investigating, never having read the Bible, never having been to church. So I can relate exactly to her as she grew in her faith. So the first thing, point 1 on your outline now, we're going to do some filling in the blanks. Rahab is aware of God's activity. Rahab is aware of God's activity. In verse 10, she says, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you, and what you did to the two kings, the two Amorite kings. Note that everyone in Jericho has heard this. So at this point, Rahab is on the same ground as everyone else. Everyone has heard what the Israelite God has done. But notice here that many recognized that there was a being that was stronger than mankind at work. You can't part a Red Sea and not think that that is stronger than what any human can do. So lots of people were believing that, but we'll find out that Rahab was the only one that acted on it. I remember when I grew up, I was a bluebird, and then I became a campfire girl, and because I didn't go to church camp, I went to bluebird and campfire girl camp every year for 11 years since I was 7 years old, and I loved it. And by the time I was 17, I was a counselor in training, and I got to stay there for a month, and we slept on cots just right out under the stars, and I just loved it. And I had a counselor that I believe strongly today that she was a Christian. And because it was campfire girls, Indians, we studied a lot of things about the Creator and sand painting and stuff. And I was very proud that I was an atheist. And so I would pipe up when we would be talking about things about the Creator and God, and I would say, well, I don't believe there is one. And she challenged me. And she said, okay, Francie, when you're lying on your cot at night, I just want you to look up at the stars. I want you to just look up at the stars every single night, and I want you to think, do you think somebody that was a creator made that display? And of course, you could lie up there and you could see shooting stars all the time. And that was my first introduction, and that was my first point at believing that there was a God. Exactly where Rahab was. There was a God that could do mighty things, that had done mighty things. But But you know what? This is not a step to be taken just once where we kind of are aware of God's activity. Because our faith is always meant to grow, the place that we can always start from is by looking and seeing what God has done and is doing. So if we go to that point, and then you can say, God did that. God did that. And then it's a step of growth in your faith right there to lead it to praise or thanksgiving to your Lord. I just had that experience today, looking at this tiny little baby, 1 hour old, and just telling God, I didn't deserve this goodness, but thank you so much. And when I lifted up little 2-year-old Gigi so she could peer in that little bassinet, and you know how they're all red at first, they have the little cap on, and I said, do you want to see your brother? And she said, yes. So I lifted him up, and her face was like this. And her daddy was looking at her and just started cracking up. But as she had that look, it's kind of softened, and then it turned into this really cool little smile. And I thought, that's exactly what happens when we think about a creator. We're like, oh, and then we see something that he has done that is marvelous. And then we go, oh, it's wonderful. Second point, Rahab's awareness moves to faith in God's supremacy. Rahab's awareness moves to faith in God's supremacy. Rahab does see God as a supreme God. In verse 11, she says, for the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. So right there, she's admitting that all of the gods that she has worshipped her whole life, Asherah, the sea goddess, Baal, the storm and fertility god, Mot, the god of death, Anat, the god of war, and even old man god El, who created all of those other gods. This God is the supreme God. The other gods cannot hold a candle to him, because she says this God is over heaven and earth. Rahab has faith in an active God. Here's something that we see that's different. Everybody else has looked at what all of Jericho knows what God did in the past. They know the history of God. He parted the Red Sea, and he gave them victory over these 2 very strong Amorite kings. But look what she says in verse 9. She says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. She sees a God that will be dealing with them in the future. That's something different, to anticipate that your God is active and he's going to be doing something else. And then the part that I really like is that she has faith in a God who's personally involved with his people, because when she says he has given you the land, a distant God doesn't give gifts to the people that he is God over. So she is realizing that unlike the other gods that she was raised with, this is a God that is a personal God. But there's still something missing, because though her faith has grown, she still doesn't see this God being her God. And I don't think it's because she doesn't want to be part of God's people. I think she believes everything except that she, a Canaanite and a harlot, could ever be part of this people that belong to God. A lot of us, our faith stops at this point. We believe everything about God's supremacy. We believe he's moving in history to create a glorious end. We believe his word, but we don't allow ourselves to really believe that we are part of his people. I lived like that a long time after I became a Christian, and I would go to youth group and I would think, nobody in this room really understands me. Nobody knows where I've come from. They've all been going to church since cradle roll. They don't get it. They don't have the doubts of the faith that I have, because they never doubt. That was the record I would play in my head. Sometimes we believe that we don't belong with his people because we're too scarred from the past, or we're too marred by the present, or we're too ignorant of his word, or we're too knowledgeable of the world. And you know what? That's why this story is so great, because it addresses all of that kind of thinking. And that's why I love this story so much. Number 3 on your outline. Rahab's faith leads her to choose God over Israel. God over her culture. Rahab's faith leads her to choose God over her culture. This right here is the proof of her heart. This is the moment where, because of God nudging her, that her faith is actually translated into action. It's not just talk. It's not just, what I've heard. It's not just what I believe God's going to do. It's actually, because of what I heard and because of what I believe, this is what I'm going to do. And what does she do? She chooses to protect God's people at great risk to herself. If she got caught lying to the king, she would be executed as a traitor. What if the soldiers had decided to thoroughly search her in? Or what if someone had seen her take the 2 Israel spies up to the roof and turned her in? But she chose to protect God's people, even with these risks at hand. This is the part that's like an old Hitchcock thriller that you're watching, like The Lady Vanishes or 39 Steps, if any of you like old black and white movies. This is the part where you think, oh no, don't get caught. She's doing it. She's so brave. She chooses to seek God's deliverance from death. This, in verse 12 and 13, when she asked them, she says, "Give me a pledge of truth and spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." This is the point where she is basically asking, could your personal God be personal to me? Do you think he would do that? In this story, the 2 spies of Israel represent God to Rahab. And so when she is asking for this personal treatment, she is asking that she could come under God's care and that she could enjoy some of what God is giving to his people. What she believed gave her the courage to choose God rather than to rely on the systems in place. She could have just thought, my king is mighty, this is a mighty city, these walls are mighty, I'm going to rely on what's in place. Or she could have been paralyzed by fear and done nothing. But no, she acted in courage. And she chose to obey God's plan set before her. Verse 21 says, "According to your word, so be it." I don't know that I've ever said that out loud to God or to my husband or to anybody else. According to your word, so be it. I always want to leave a little wiggle room. To me, that is a humble surrender to God and his plan. It's what my youth pastor used to call a super decision. He used to say, when you make a super decision for God in your life, a lot of the other decisions are so obvious, you don't even have to sit there and have angst over them. They're just obvious. I was trying to think of how I saw this in practice, and I think most recently it was with my daughter being pregnant. And she is this type of gal that reads everything, health-wise. Health-wise, she eats organic, she reads everything. Once she became pregnant, there was, of course, never a drop of alcohol would cross her lips. There was no sushi, and she's married to a chef and they love sushi. No sushi. No fish that would have any mercury in it, not even the allotted amount that is said to be okay. No caffeine, and no processed meat. Like, you couldn't buy lunch meat. She wouldn't eat that. And it wasn't even hard for her to make those decisions because she had made a super decision. I am pregnant, I'm going to take care of this baby, and there wasn't any angst over it. There wasn't only, oh, I wish I could have some. It was just like, no, not for now. Super decision. When we come and meet the Lord, there's a super decision right there. Now, a lot of times, as it did with me, because I came out of so much ignorance, some of those super decisions, God was very gentle with me and only gave me one to face at a time. The first one was probably my morality needed to change. The second one was how I dressed needed to change. Finally, we got around to my speech needed to change. And lying needed to change. I think the last one that God really spoke to me on was smoking needed to change. Super decisions. And once I was confronted with them, it was a no-brainer. It was like, of course. But I'm glad that I have a gracious God that only would confront me with one of those things at a time. You know, we might not face life-threatening choices like Rahab did, but we face choices where we are choosing God or choosing ourselves every day. So I just want you to think about the last few days of your life. What choices have you made this week? For time commitments, for money expenditures, for words spoken, for places attended, like here, or not attended. And of course, let's not forget what choices have you made as to how you are going to judge others. Now, think about the choices you have made. They could be very simple. You're at the grocery store. Do I buy this toy for my dog or not? You know, when you go down the pet aisle. When you make those choices, are you thinking about the super decision that you belong to God and what choice He wants you to make? I am sorry to say that often I choose whatever I want. And I choose something that will please me. And so what I have been trying to do is to really be aware of God when I make those choices. And hopefully what's going to happen is that eventually my choices will reflect God more and more as I make the effort to be aware of God when I make my choices. Now, when it comes to obeying God, we look at Rahab and we see that she is a very strong woman. I mean, she came up with a plan like that. She came up with a lie like that, really good lie. She had a lot of logic. She didn't bat an eye. And yet you think when it came time for her to obey the spies and they said, we'll come back, hang this cord, I would have said, you know what, I got some really good plans. I know how to make a plan, and my plan is just wait 10 minutes, I'll go gather my family, and we'll all come with you. We can sneak out down the wall, we can tie this rope here, and off we go, and we'll all hide in the mountains for 3 days. That's what I would have done. She didn't do that. She didn't do that. So, where are you? Would you like to crawl out the window? Are you into making your own plans? Or is God nudging you about something that He's saying, wait for me. Let me give you the plan. And you're resisting it, thinking, I don't know if I want to wait because I think I could figure this out on my own. It's a good time to stop and say, God, what is your plan anyway? What is it? I know mine is good, but maybe yours is better. A little side note about lying. Does God condone lying? And oh my gosh, I read so much about this through every book that I read. You know, it was wartime. Lying is okay in wartime and all of this. Basically, what it comes down to, it's a super decision. Does God condone lying? No, He doesn't. Ezekiel 23:1, you shall not bear false witness. Could He have accomplished this task if He wanted to with Rahab not lying? Of course He could have. I mean, He opened the jail cells in the New Testament just like that in the middle of the night. Could He have accomplished His task without using Rahab at all? He could have. I believe, now this is just going to be my opinion, that to live the life that Rahab was living, that she became accustomed to a thought pattern where the end justified the means. So she had, if you think about it, she had to support herself. There's not a lot of jobs for women, single women, to support herself. And so therefore, to justify the end of having enough money to live and not be a beggar on the street, she said, I'll become a harlot. So she lies to herself in that by saying there's no other choice. I have to do this. There's the lie. I have to do this. And then she lives the lie. And she also probably would be lying to other people. She would want repeat customers. She would want the men that visited her bed to come back. And how would you do that? But to pretend like you were enjoying their company. So she lied to herself and she lied to others, and it was a pattern. And therefore, it's easy to snap lie to soldiers standing at your door. We're a society where lying is becoming really accepted. A study showed that Americans lie about an average of 11 times per week. And the most dishonest time of the day is between 9 and 9:30 p.m. at night, so I better be done before that. And 74% of college students admit to serious test cheating. And the profession with the highest number of liars is teachers. So, you might not want to listen to everything I say up here. It has also been found that not lying improves your health. You are less melancholy, you have less sore throats, and you have less headaches. And it didn't matter if the lies were tiny white lies or big ones. When God created us, He did not create us to lie. Ephesians 4:24 and 25 says, "Put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of truth. Therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak the truth, each one of you, with his neighbor." God calls us to be different than what our culture is, and especially what it's becoming. He calls us to be different, and He provides us with the power to transform us so we can be different. But that does not mean that He's not going to use us before we're fully transformed. So you can't use that as an excuse. God took Rahab just as she was, a lying harlot whose heart had been touched by God, yet whose behavior had yet to be changed. And He used her. He used her. Are you using your struggles with the old self, habits, as an excuse to label yourself unusable by God? You have no excuse when you read this story, because she has made no lifestyle changes here yet at all, and God is totally using her because of her faith. 4 on your outline. Rahab's faith choices lead her to wait in hope for God's deliverance. So she sent them away, they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. 2 weeks she waited for them to come back. I mean, they had to go do the whole circumcise thing and heal. 2 weeks she waited. They didn't tell her 2 weeks. She could have thought 2 days. So she lives in this upper floor of her house with all of her family, still trying to run a business as usual so no one would catch on, with this scarlet cord dangling out her window. We have a hope of a less populated household. My daughter and her husband, the one that just had her 3rd child, they live with us, and they bought a house in Manteca, and they are building on a room. But the city of Manteca does not understand my time frame. And the permit is not coming, and it's not coming, and it's not coming. So I am waiting. And I feel like I'm like Rahab, waiting with a very crowded family, trying to just live life as normal while I'm tripping over people and toys, and there's a lot of crying and whining, and I'm thinking, when is this going to stop? And this is what the Lord told me. Proverbs 20, verse 22, "Wait for the Lord, and He will save you." God has me in a holding pattern right now. And is my attitude one of the scarlet cord of being hopeful, or is my attitude one of complaining? How about you? When you're in a waiting pattern, are you hopeful or are you complaining? That was a really good lesson for me. One of the great things about looking at all of Rahab's process of faith is seeing what role God played in that. And so now we're going to look at what God did here really quickly. God pursues Rahab the harlot. This is why she was noticing his activity, and she was gaining faith in his supremacy. God pursues Rahab the harlot. He pursued her in the midst of what she heard. She heard that he parted the Red Sea. And if you go back 40 years to when he parted the Red Sea and you think about God pursuing Rahab, you know what? He didn't part the Red Sea just for the Israelites to get through. He parted the Red Sea for her and for you and for me. That's how he pursues us. And he pursued Rahab in the midst of major events going on. I mean, her whole city was about to be destroyed, and her life, and possibly everybody she knew. And Joshua, I'm sure he thought he was sending those spies for military purposes. But you know what? God was sending those spies for Rahab. I don't think they got a whole lot of reconnaissance done. It doesn't sound like they were able to roam the city and gather much information other than what Rahab told him. I think God sent those spies for Rahab and to encourage the people with some encouraging words. You know, God started nudging me with those stars way back when I was 17. And then that went on to me dabbling in Buddhism for a while. I read the book Siddhartha. I thought, oh, this is cool. I'm going to be cool. And I kind of liked that for a while. And then he nudged me by making me notice that I didn't really like the person I was becoming. And then he nudged me by noticing that my parents had standards that were really good standards, but they didn't have any reason for them other than nice girls don't do that. And I'm looking around thinking, you don't know what you're talking about, because all the nice girls I see are doing that. And he was nudging me with even those thoughts. And then he was nudging me when my two best friends who were twins met the Lord, and they would not stop talking about Jesus. I remember the day we ditched school and sat out by their pool, and they wanted to read to me out of their children's Bible. And I said, no, I don't think so. And they said, well, we'll tell you something about our older brother that he said about you if you'll pick a story. So I looked through the table of contents. The shortest page numbers was Daniel. I said, okay, that one. And then you tell me what David said. And so they read it to me, and I just was like, oh, you guys believe this? And they said, yeah, we do. And I just thought they were ridiculous, and then I had a date with David, so it was great. God was pursuing me that whole time. Do you believe in the power of a personal God? The same one who sent 2 war spies to save a prostitute, a personal God who is at work in you. Number 2, God uses Rahab, the harlot. He uses her. I've already touched on this a little bit. What she tells the king's men really is brilliant. And the fact that she would know what they would do, like she could anticipate they'll run out to the fjords, they'll wait 3 days, they'll hunt around, they'll come back. She kind of could have been a commander of the war herself. He used her to help hide those spies. And God used her to say encouraging words. When the 2 spies go back to Joshua, they use the very same phrases that Rahab told them. In verses 23 and 24, they say, all the inhabitants of the land, moreover, have melted away before us. That's a far different spy report than they got 40 years ago. Far different. God has encouraged us with his spy report, hasn't he? We kind of know how it's going to end. We know that he's on our side and that the battle is his. We have an encouraging spy report. And then God uses her example for generations to come. Hebrews 11:31, she is in the hall of faith. It says, by faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient. We're reading that to this day, and we're encouraged by her faith. So whatever you might think that you have going against you, let this story set you straight. God's grace extends to everyone. God's plan uses the least likely, the least worthy, the least moral, the least informed, because he looks into our hearts and not our histories. He looks into our hearts and not our histories, and I am so thankful for that. 3, God saves Rahab the harlot. He provided a safe place. No one found her up in that room for 2 weeks. I sort of just imagined it would be like the hiding place, where you were hiding Jews from the Nazis or something. They all were up there waiting. And he provided protection for her. Joshua 6, verse 17 says, the city shall be under the ban. In it, all that it is belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her in her house shall live. And then in verse 20 and 22 of chapter 6, it says, when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. Now, they have some archaeological evidence that the wall actually fell inward. So it was like the city imploded on itself. So does that mean that Rahab's house fell down flat? Because then right after that, after the wall falls down flat, in verse 22 of chapter 6, Joshua says to the two men, "Go into the harlot's house and bring out the woman and all that she has there." Well, they have discovered in excavating the land that there's a portion of the wall that stayed erect. And it was a portion of the wall that faced the foothills, right where she told the men to go hide. Now, it was charred because after they stormed the city, they burnt the whole thing. God protects us. The wall falls down flat, but not Rahab's house. Isn't that incredible? It just gives me chills just to think about it. And God does the same for us today. You know what? He helps us stay erect inwardly and outwardly, even when we feel like everything around us is crumbling, even when we feel like we're crumbling inside and there's a lot of rubble all around us. He comes in and he snatches us and he saves us. And he takes us to a place where we can become our new self and be transformed. God enfolds Rahab the harlot. God enfolds. She becomes from an outsider to an insider. It says in verse 23 that they went and got Rahab, of chapter 6, and placed them outside the camp of Israel, outside. And then what happens is the author of Joshua speaks in the present tense of the day he is writing, and he says, "However, Rahab the harlot and her father's household," this is in verse 25, "and all she had, Joshua spared, and she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day." She goes from an outsider to an insider. She goes from humiliation to honor. You had in your Bible study how she married Salmon, who was the prince of Judah. His father was the leader of Judah, and that's who she ended up marrying. She went from a prostitute to a princess. Isn't that amazing? And then you hear that she went, there's more, it's just incredible. When you read the genealogy in Matthew 1, you find out that it was through her son that line Jesus was born. She was the great-great-grandmother of David, and it was through David's line that Jesus was born. She went from heathen harlot to messianic matron. Isn't that incredible? So, why have I kept using the word harlot in the last part when it talks about God? Do you notice that in your outline? I kept saying Rahab the harlot, Rahab the harlot, Rahab the harlot. Well, when I read Hebrews 11, it really bothered me that in Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, she's called Rahab the harlot. And I'm like, can't we be done with that description? She's in the Hall of Faith, my goodness. And then I realized that we miss the whole point of the story if we soften who Rahab was. The whole point of the story is God's grace and his transforming power. And let's not lose that, especially when we think of ourselves. We all play the harlot to our relationship with the Lord at some point. I mean, I think in the mornings I'm going to have a great time with the Lord this morning. And then I reach over and there's my phone. And I grab my phone. I think I'll look at my email. Oh, I think I'll look at Facebook for a while. And before I know it, I'm late for my first appointment of where I have to be. I played the harlot with God right there because I chose my phone. We all play the harlot. So Rahab the harlot in the Hall of Faith is encouraging. It just means that God has placed us in a place where he accepts us and adopts us, and we can be his even when we play the harlot. Grace is ongoing, just as transformation is ongoing. So, the scarlet cord. I have worn my scarlet cord tonight. I was hoping it would be a little cooler because I'm really sweaty back here. But the cool part about the word cord is in Hebrew, it can also mean the word hope. It's the same word, tikwa. So when she hung that scarlet cord outside her window, it was an outward sign of her inner hope that they were going to come back. So why the scarlet cord? Well, all of the Bible points to Jesus. Even in the Old Testament, it's all pointing to Jesus. One night, 3,460 years ago, the blood of the Passover lamb was spread across the doorposts of the homes of those that had faith as a hope that the angel of death would pass them by. And he did. And then, 1,446 years later, the scarlet cord is draped over the cross of Jesus' blood that was the final Passover lamb that was sacrificed for us. And now, every time that we take communion, we raise our cup of communion, the scarlet cord is wound around it and in it for us to remember the hope that we have in Jesus, in his transforming power today and tomorrow and the next day. So I have given you scarlet cords. So instead of hanging them out your window as a sign of hope, you might use them in your Bible or in your notebook. And remember, the scarlet cord is your hope of what's to come and what's to will be. And it's okay if you have a history that you're not proud of, because God is a God of redemption and transformation. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you extend your grace to us in the scarlet cord flowing from your Son's sacrifice. And in doing so, you've given us a scarlet hope. Lord, I thank you for Rahab and what an example she is, and how she knew so little about you, but she knew she wanted you. And Lord, I pray that you would take us and our desire to want you, and that you would extend to us your love. Lord, help us see that you are only too happy to adopt us into your family. And thank you for the scarlet cord that can always remind us of who we are and who we are in relation to you and what you offer us. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.